Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Rethinking Education Webinar Series. This is the second session, Rethinking Education in the Community. I am Jeremy Booth, the Director of Communications for Childhood Education International. It is wonderful to have all of you with us, and particularly our panelists who have joined, who I will be introducing here briefly. Before I do that, I have two quick notes to share that this webinar is being recorded and also live streamed onto YouTube. So if you go to YouTube, our YouTube channel, you can search that by typing Childhood Education International into the YouTube search bar. This video will be stored there as soon as we finish, and it'll be available for reference back. Once this finishes, if you're not able to stay for the whole event, if you wish to share with coworkers or anyone else you think this might be of interest to, you're certainly encouraged to do that. And then the second point is that we will be having a question and answer session at the end of the initial discussion, which will occur about 2/3 of the way into the webinar. So at about 40 minutes into the hour is the expectation. We got a few more people saying hello from New York and Armenia, and we will have some others say hello as well, particularly the panelists. So I'm going to allow everyone to introduce themselves, when we will start with Johnny.
Good morning, good afternoon. Hello, it's really nice to be with you. My name is Johnny Wells. I'm the Director of Education for Destination Imagination. Our company is a global nonprofit organization. We're headquartered in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Probably more primarily known by our open-ended challenges that we showcase through regional and affiliate tournaments. Although we do partner with other alliances to offer educational experiences in other places globally and in other ways. Our main purpose is to inspire through the creative process and equip students with invaluable skills, with creative outlets, and just with the confidence that they need to succeed in school, whether career, even beyond that. And we do want to be part of helping a community rethink what education really looks like.
Thank you for doing that for me, Johnny. I realize that what brings everyone together is the topic of rethinking education in the community. I forgot to mention that in the beginning. So all of our panelists here their work advances the connections and strengthens the connections between the community and the education process. That is what connects us here. And Johnny, I appreciate you bringing that up. All right, Amrita, would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Amrita. I'm from New Delhi, India, and I'm chairperson of an organization called Mobile Creches. We essentially work with migrant populations in India, and therefore we are mobile. And creches is another word for daycare centers that we've been using, probably a French word that started off for daycares, and we call ourselves mobile creches. While we are in New Delhi, but we have a reach across the entire country, and we do serve the underserved children, providing holistic and integrated care and nutrition for most of them that come to our centers. At a given point of time, we have about 50 centers across the country. We work with communities, we work with families, and we work for the young children of those families. Thank you.
Thank you, Amrita. And last but not least, Josh.
Yeah, hello, everyone. It's great. Looking forward to this conversation. I'm based in Tucson, Arizona, and I see Meg out there in my hometown in the Sonoran Desert. I'm an educator and an artist, and I direct a nonprofit called CommunityShare, which is looking at, if you kind of imagine your whole community as a classroom where educators and students can connect to the skills and wisdom and knowledge that lives in all of us in a city, to support real world learning experiences for students. So we do that in Tucson, and now we're working in cities around the United States. And I'm just super excited to dive into the role of community in this work.
Thank you, everyone. So I'm really excited to get started because there are 3 individuals here who are looking at that relationship between community and education in a really unique way. But that's not all they share in common. What initially brought this connection together was the fact that they either published an article or one of their colleagues published an article in our magazine, Childhood Education Innovations, which 6 times a year comes out due to the hard work of my colleague, Ann Bauer, who puts together some amazing articles from education leaders from around the world, pioneering the most innovative approaches to education design and delivery. If you're not familiar with the magazine, I encourage you to go to our website, ceinternational1892.org. The drop-down menu is, at the top has publications, and you can click on Childhood Education Innovations. And currently, the article from Destination Imagination, Johnny's colleague Chris, is publicly available for reading there as well. And if you I also encourage anyone to consider the various subscription options that we have, because there's some really, really engaging content in there. So as I mentioned, the webinar series, this topic, we are looking at rethinking education in a community. The purpose and what I hope everyone takes away from during this event is an appreciation and an application of a specific kind of mindset, which is rethinking education, thinking about education design and delivery in an innovative way. And in this case, we have 3 panelists who have pioneered approaches to rethinking education and how it relates and how the community relates to it, how community leaders and members can be more involved in the learning process so that young learners are supported as much as possible. They're harnessing the knowledge of a community and connecting that community to the education process to make it a more holistic experience. The idea is hopefully that everyone in the audience gains ideas about involving their communities. So I want to, but it is worth acknowledging that some of the audiences with whom you are working in the different contexts, you may hear some of the work that is done on behalf of the panelists, and the organizations may not feel like it is an exact fit. The idea is to identify threads of commonality between the work that they do and your context, which means identifying community members who can support ways that the communities can be involved in the education process. That, more than anything, is what we hope that you walk away with at the end of today. And that now takes us to the beginning of the webinar. Last week, we looked at rethinking education in the classroom and how to break education out of the traditional classroom environment and the ideas that we have surrounding the classroom. We're now going to look a little bit broader in how we can break education out of the traditional confines of the classroom and the school itself, and look at how the community is involved. So without further ado, we're going to jump into the discussion with the first question. And I'm going to turn to you first, Johnny. With the question is, what is rethinking education to you? How would you define it? It's a multi-part question. How would you define it? And particularly, what do you think the community's role is or should be in the education process?
Okay, well, I think that one of the things that we have to do when we start thinking rethinking education is to get everyone in the community to start looking at and focusing on learning. I was very intrigued with Josh. He used the word learning numerous times, and we've traditionally been much more focused on teaching, if you would. And so I think bringing the community back around when you start thinking about education and rethinking what education is to put learning at the focus, and finding innovating ways of learning that put the learner at the center and adjusting to meet the needs of each and every child, regardless of their abilities, regardless of their circumstances, regardless of their environment. Education should be shaped around the learner, not around the delivery system. And I think traditionally community has become very focused on the delivery system and not on the child and the learner. And I think that's really important that we look at it in that particular framework. Our organization defines it by placing the learner in the experience and allowing youth to feel what learning is. At the same time, it's about also training facilitators to recognize what learning looks like, what it feels like for the learner, what it feels like for the facilitator when learning is taking place, and how to encourage learning, to provide ample skills to be able to explore and to expand, that it's not a set recipe or formula, if you would. And that's what we have a tendency to try to make it, and rethinking education is breaking out of that. Once those particular pieces are in place, to change education, young people start to recognize that learning, well, in the entire community starts recognizing how innate learning is to human beings. You know, individuals thrive when they're given the freedom in the realms of creativity or curiosity to become true lifelong learners. That emerges. And that allows you to be able to even present more information, more skills when that spark is there. And we have a tendency in traditional schooling sometimes to kind of stifle some of that desire to want to learn. And the community, a community needs to be aware of what exists within their sphere of influence and to recognize their responsibility for those that sit within that sphere. I think through COVID, we really started to see, I know we did in the United States, how much the community relied on the education body, if you would, because education had been the ones that were taking care of childcare for young learners. They were the ones feeding children. It was a place of safety for them. And then when the pandemic hit and that was removed, I think the community really started to recognize their dependency on an education system. And beyond that, starting to look at all the areas of community growth that are impacted by the type and the level of learning that had been taking place within their own community. So I really think that community future is shaped by the attitude of the community about learning, not about teaching, but their attitude about learning. And I think that that's really what you have to consider when you think about the role of community. What do they say about learning in their sphere of influence where they are?
I couldn't have said it better. Thanks, Johnny. I agree. I think something that we want to always emphasize and see international is putting learning side by side with education. Whenever people think of education, sometimes the connotations that are surrounding the thought of education can be limiting. But when you say learning, I think it's exactly what everyone thinks about that it should be. And so when you put it side by side, people think about that more sincere learning process of getting children in, and anyone really, it's a lifelong process. Anyone who has that desire to learn should be granted that opportunity. And so by emphasizing that importance, I think you hit the nail on the head. Amrita, what about what does it mean for you, rethinking education, and what do you see the roles of the community in education and learning?
Absolutely. I kind of concur with everything that Johnny said, but I'll just like to pull it down to early learning. So for me, that early learning and care is something that really I need to think of and emphasize, and that's my work and that's my passion. So learning, yes, but really that emphasis on early learning, which at least we find that there's very little association between learning and that fact that learning begins at birth. And it's not just associated with reading and writing. So those kind of myths and beliefs that normally are prevalent in the community, to be able to bring them down to the importance of early learning, care, that integrated nature of development during those years, and how they influence and impact the later life, at least in the work that I do at Mobile Creches, because we have most of the time the most marginalized populations in the country who work at the construction sites or who are the informal daily wagers who've never had an opportunity to maybe have any sort of formal education. And for them to be, thinking about early education and early learning becomes quite a challenging thing. So we spend a lot of time to build up the community to understand that this is the foundation and this is where you start. And if this is neglected, you can never, kind of build upon it later in life. Mm-hmm. So really, I would like to define, education, or to me, learning really as something which is a very joyful experience, which is flexible. I think Johnny said it all, and I have put them in just shorter words. And it should be contextual. It should be within your environment. it shouldn't be out of context. So I can't have a curriculum, which India is a vast country. So from north to south, and we speak almost 22 languages officially in the country. So we need to be flexible. We need to make programs that can be adapted. We can't be rigid about it. Therefore, for us, the family plays a very critical role in education and learning of the child. So it's not just the school or the daycare center or whatever institute the child is going for. It's far beyond that. It's that home, beyond that, that community that the child lives in. So really, it's that whole experience that the child will get within the community, within the home, and within the care that it's getting institutionally, wherever. That's where the learning and the education would happen in the best possible way that we think. And at Mobile Creches, this is our belief. And when we work with children, we ensure that families and their communities are really part of that program. And we use all kinds of traditional methods to build awareness amongst them, which is street theater, some of the ancient storytelling methodologies. Because if I start going and giving them a lecture on what early education is all about, nobody's going to sit and listen to me. So we've adapted and kind of focused on that kind of a way to build awareness. We make them go through similar experiential activities that we give to the children so that they understand that, okay, this is what the child is, learning when the child is doing that. That helps. And I can say that we've made quite a few breakthroughs because of that kind of an approach.
Thank you, Amrita. You said a lot of really, really important content there. The one thing I did pick up and I want to emphasize is setting that you mentioned foundation. And I think there's a lot of talk in the education sector and a lot of awareness that making sure that foundation is strong from the very beginning is crucial to ensure successful learning in the future. Unfortunately, a lot of education systems end up playing catch up later down the road because they focus maybe a little bit too late and they didn't put enough effort into that early learning. And we're starting to realize that if you do have that strong foundation, it can ensure better opportunities moving forward. All right, Josh.
Yeah, all the comments that have been shared really resonated with me, particularly thinking about this idea of learner, because I think part of it is also we need to remember, how do we support educators as learners? Because I think everyone, as you were saying, Johnny, we all want that creativity and the joy that and how do we bring that also to the educators and the young people so we're experiencing it together, just like with families as learners. How do we bring that joy and that learner mindset, I think, is really key. One thing, I mean, is so fundamental, but I think is just thinking about what is the purpose of education is something, if we're going to reimagine it, I think we also need to ask ourselves some somewhat simple questions of like, is it to create lifelong learners? Is it, because I think that's where sometimes we're challenged, is some, you would say it's to create a workforce, some is to create lifelong learners and to create, social emotionally healthy learners. And maybe it's all of those things, but I think really being clear about what is the purpose of an education system sounds simple, but I think is actually quite important. And then in terms of the role of community, personally, I've never understood like why the idea of community is out here and then schools are the separate entity. It just, as a kid, it never made sense to me. And now as an educator for 20 years, it still doesn't make sense to me. And because I've always felt that who you learn from can be as equally as important as what you learn. And so how do we facilitate expanding the who? And I just had a couple slides to share along those lines real quick. So part of my thinking is that, a lot of education focuses on the what students know. And I'm particularly interested, as I said, on the who. And I think there's a huge opportunity in the intersection of those two. And so a lot of the work that we do at the organization I work with, at CommunityShare, is looking at the idea, what if we could create a human library where we're looking at the entire region as educators and can contribute actively to support educators and young people in real world learning experiences. And I sort of think of it as like a human library of knowledge and wisdom. And so if we imagine that, we can think about all the different folks in a region that have incredible lived experience that can contribute in the forms of, what I sort of call creative, cultural, intellectual, and social capital. There's many other forms as well, but whether you're a retiree, an elder, a parent, someone that works in the government, higher ed, nonprofits, all of these folks are living in all of our communities, yet we don't often think of them as this amazing wealth of resources to co-create learning with educators and young people. And particularly around social capital, why is it so important to expand that? And there's lots of research that shows that access to the who can increase happiness, health, economic success, academic achievement. And so it's not just a sort of a nice to have, it's actually critical to shaping your future. And I think we can all think about our own lives, what has shaped our own career trajectory or life trajectory. It's often a person, a mentor who has helped guide us through that pathway. And a lot of what we focus at CommunityShare is that social capital, those community connections are not equitably accessible. At least in the United States, higher poverty schools have much weaker community connections in general than lower poverty schools. And so how do we create pathways and systems that what I sort of think of as democratizing connectedness to our own community? And so that's a lot of the work that we're doing at CommunityShare is looking at how to create those pathways to expand, how to engage parents, how do we engage all those other amazing humans in our own human libraries, and then how do we actually look at our communities as potentially the content for education, meaning how do we look at the real world issues as the way that we're going to learn English or math or whatever you're looking at, rather than thinking as a nice to have or an add-on.
That is a perfect way to wrap up the topic and move into the next question, because I love that phrase that you mentioned, Josh, democratizing connectedness. It's something that you mentioned several times in the article that you published with us in the magazine. And I think it's critical because that connectedness, there's so many benefits to it, as you just pointed out, in documenting social capital and what a community's knowledge is, making that accessible to all communities. And making sure that all schools have the ability to tap into that, the abilities of community, ensure that connectedness is equally available, I think is really, really critical. And that takes us really nicely into the second question, because all of you are doing work that looks at breaking down those barriers between the education system that, I agree, Josh, doesn't make a lot of sense, the barriers that might exist between schooling and communities. And looking really at the basic level, which I think all of you shared, ultimately comes down to the learner. What was your main source of inspiration for the innovative work that you're doing, ensuring that learners have equal opportunities, and in ensuring that all of the social capital and all of the wealth of knowledge in a community is accessible? What were you seeing in your respective community that inspired you to develop that work? And we will start with Amrita. Amrita, you're on mute.
So in India, while we are a fast developing country, we find that there is a lot of economic disparity still existing. And what really motivated me and inspires me is the fact that I somehow have always felt that there is a great need to provide that opportunity for learning, equal quality learning opportunities to all. So to all is then becomes a very challenging thing in the kind of societal norms that we are living in, because there is a high level of economic disparity and discrimination. There is social and societal discrimination. There is a lot of gender discrimination, which probably is there across the world, but we find it really, multiplied to quite a bit in our country. So that is what motivates me, that we really have to work towards providing an equal opportunity to all. While the public provisioning is there, but we find again that the public provisioning is not doing any serious implementation or giving it a very serious kind of a thought process or even the energies, because children seem to be the least priority everywhere, and especially the young child. Therefore, we have to really get our act together. And the inspiration is that somehow there should be an equal level playing field for all children in the country. And what work we do, and we do it and we lead by example, that if you can give quality care, which is integrated and holistic in nature right there in those disadvantaged circumstances and difficult circumstances, then this can be possible across the country. And it can be done at a low cost and with a lot of motivation and with a lot of people engaged, with communities there, with the whole society coming together. This would be one way to eradicate all the kinds of disparities and discriminations that I was talking about. So poverty is one big issue. So if we really start taking care of the children right there, we will be able to fight that situation of poverty very well. But we don't invest in there, and then we do reactive measures when the child is in college or in graduate school. We start doing remedial, or we start giving grants, or we start getting them to have reservations in India. So we say that so many seats in the university are reserved for the backward. But why should they be backward if they are given the same opportunity right at the start? So these are some of the things that inspire me and tell me that, look, the investment here is so important, and we really need to think about it and do something about it, which is really going to change the whole situation in the country. We have a very, very rich demographic dividend in that a lot of youth we have. But if that youth hasn't reached its full potential, we are never going to reap the benefits of it. Therefore, that investment motivates me and inspires me to work with this sector, and Mobile Creches is trying to lead the whole movement for this. And we hope, we don't know how long it's going to take, but we'll carry on.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing, Amrita. The equality and equal opportunities is something that I think a lot of us want to ensure all children and all learners have. And yeah, the work that Mobile Creches is doing to ensure that children of, I know a lot of the populations that work with Mobile Creches are migrant workers who may not be in the financial position to be able to send their child to school. By setting up the creches, the daycare centers in the specific area where these people are working, you give that child that equal or an equal opportunity to learn and to be cared for and to develop. And so seeing that challenge and seeing how some of those workers may not have been able to provide that, and then Mobile Creches to come in and try to even the playing field, I think is really, really wonderful. It's a specific challenge that you saw in that environment, and Mobile Creches is a direct response to that. Josh, what were the challenges that you were seeing in your community that you wanted to address through your work?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on something Amrita said, just because it really resonated around the idea of how do we kind of reveal and help people understand the disparities that we're facing? Because I think part of the value of engaging the community in education is actually a way to educate the community sometimes about the realities of what's going on in education, sort of thinking about how do you put the public back into public education. And I think she was really beautifully speaking to that. I didn't want to lose that because I actually think a lot of people haven't been in school since, for so long that they've sort of forgotten what are the realities, as if, things haven't changed. And I think we need to think of ourselves as needing to be educated as well, as people in the community, and engaging community as an opportunity for that, this as an aside. In terms of the inspiration, in some ways it's very personal inspiration for me. As a kid, I was frankly not super inspired or somewhat bored, I would say. I did fine in school, but I never felt like I understood why I was learning anything. I just sort of did what I was told, take the test and such. And then I had a chance when I was in high school to study turtles and the alligators, actually, in Alabama and South Carolina with the real wildlife biologists. And it changed everything, because I realized if I wanted to discover new species or to protect populations, I needed to understand math, I needed to understand science, I needed to understand the relationships between creatures and humans, social ecology, so all kinds of things. But it never dawned on me until I got to work with a real, scientist in that case, and that led me on basically to become an ecologist after many years. So it was a very personal place where I saw the power of bringing relevance and real world learning to my own lived experience. And then fast forward many years as an educator, I was working at a high school where I wanted to bring that to my students. And so I was sort of matching my students' passions and projects with partners in the community who could work together on different issues in their community. And I did that for 8 years, and it led to some really amazing, projects. But what happened is then I left the high school and essentially all that social capital, all those relationships went with me. And so I realized that that was not a very sustainable or scalable way to connect communities and schools if it's dependent on a single human that's sort of connecting the dots. And so that's what was the real inspiration, was to think about how could you build sort of the connective tissue in a community that's more organic, that's less of a hub and spoke model, but almost like a web that enables people to connect with each other rather than being dependent on a single person as a coordinator, and thinking about doing that for a whole region, so that people are able to share their resources across geography. And I feel in many ways our societies have become so fragmented that this is actually a way for people to essentially bump into each other that wouldn't otherwise bump, if you think about it almost like social physics. But they're bumping into each other around shared passion, around whatever real world issue that students and young people and community folks are working on.
I love that, how you have that personal anecdote where you were a young learner, teenager perhaps, and you have this interaction and you ask the question, why can't we do this more frequently? Why can't I have these interactions more frequently? This is what I really enjoy. And to see how that grew from a seed into something a lot bigger, and now into CommunityShare, where you connect community knowledge to the education system directly. Really, really cool to hear how this how it started at such a young age, and then you kept asking that question throughout your career. And now that we have something, now you have something that provides a really, really beautiful answer to that. I think that's fantastic. Thanks for sharing. Johnny, what inspires you and the Destination Imagination team to do the work that you do?
Well, I think probably the inspiration that motivates us, I think it's already probably been articulated somewhat by my co-panelists here. It's really and truly about shaping children's futures. I mean, we're looking at different techniques and methods to do that, right? But I think that really and truly, what inspires us to do what we do is that we want to shape children's futures. We want, and I think it was Amrita who used the word joy. We want to see that joy in learning, and that joy in learning becomes inspirational, and it becomes that thing that pushes us forward. But I think for us at Destination Imagination, our inspiration is linked to watching young people think creatively and to see what that looks like. That so much of the time we think about creative thinking is very inward. It's not inward, it goes out. It touches the who that Josh is talking about in the world. And the more who's we have out there in the world, the more that we can connect with people and more things that we can look at and use. And that inspiration for us really continues to be that creative process that we have for our young learners. We do that with these open-ended educational experiences that we provide. And we use that model in our staff. And Jeremy has just put up there on the screen this particular creative model that Destination Imagination has. We use this as we develop our programming, our experiences, but that same process is what we embed in the experiences we create. And not only the experiences we create, it's what we want educators, parents, those who are working with the youth to do. I want you to look at the arrows in that model. You'll notice the big arrows. Those big arrows are the general flow of the creative process. But I have to tell you, the inspiring part of that are all the little small dark arrows. If you notice, they go back and forth between those bubbles, between imagining what a solution would look like, or assessing, or collaborating. Those arrows in that model, this model is not linear, it's fluid, and those little arrows are what energize learners. I would say it's that joy that Amrita was talking about. And not only does it energize learners in the educational realm that we've been talking about, but I find that it energizes even the employees that we see use this particular process in their industry, because when they're immersed in the creative process, that energy happens. And the amount of social and emotional learning that takes place, it's quick in this kind of learning environment, when that is kind of the model that you use whenever you're trying to create any kind of experience, whether it's in your classroom, after school programming, or whatever it might be. And I also have to say that along with this, Destination Imagination has always supported learner ownership, using the creative process, using creativity to inspire learning, but that we see that also inspires the who that Josh was talking about, because when young learners connect with others out there in their environment, it yields this engaging community of volunteers. Jeremy, if you'd show the other slide that I have there, kind of look at some of our numbers. We talk about how it engages these members of community because of this inspiration piece. And that extends out to people like team managers who may work directly with the young learners. It may be event volunteers. It may be appraisers at one of our tournaments. Even our content experts who work directly with young people. If you notice there, we have a base of about 38,000 volunteers globally that do that. And those are tiered volunteers. That means that they work at the regional level, they work at which is the local community, the regional community, the state community, even the global community in that. And so whenever you're looking at that, those are spread across a large, large community of influence. And I think probably our pedagogy model encourages participants to become very resource aware. And when I say resource aware, I think that is taking note of not only what we have to work with, but what we lack, and without letting the lack of a resource hold us back. So much of the time in a community and in our inspiration, we say, well, I just don't have the resources. Well, let's look at the resources we do have, and let's use the resources we have, which is a lot of the threads that I'm hearing from my co-panelists today, is let's use those resources, and how can we stretch those resources, although they may not be the maximum that we wish we had, but let's use those to the best of our ability in that. And so I think that's where our organization with community helping in our innovation within education, it's important that our volunteers engage not only in the implementation, but just in being the who that helps support that kind of joy that we see in the creative process and the creativity that we're trying to get young people to engage in.
Thank you. I completely agree, and I like how you just mentioned the last part about the thread of commonality and what resources we do have. The thought of expanding the education and the learning connections out into the community. The entire inspiration is precisely that. The resource itself is the community, the knowledge that is shared with the experts or among the experts in a community, all the different professions and the skills that are available. If you look at education and the learning process from that scope, suddenly the possibilities exponentially increase when you're thinking rethinking education in general. Again, getting back to the title of the webinar series, I want to acknowledge a couple of the comments that we have that I appreciate the individuals taking it upon themselves to share. All of you who are watching at home or in your schools or wherever you may be tuning in from are also experts, and you are part of our community of educators and people who want to see the education and learning process grow and expand. So do feel free to respond to the questions, read the responses of others. We got a couple really beautiful responses from some educators. Lamberto, for example, looked at his inspiration from 3 different angles, looking at improving quality of education, uplifting the learners' living conditions through education, and then also personal growth. So getting back to that lifelong learning process, I think is a really beautiful need. And there are a couple other answers as well that for the sake of time, I won't be able to read word for word, but I encourage participants to look through them because there's, I think, some shared inspiration in there as well. I know I had promised that at the 40-minute mark, we would jump into the audience question and answers, but there are a couple other questions I would like to talk with our panelists first, so that we can ensure that we cover the breadth of the topic. One thing that a large challenge that a lot of our participants may run into, or our audience may run into if they're trying to apply this approach to engaging the community, is maybe some hesitance or some resistance because you are looking at education in a different way and breaking it out of that traditional thought of education is limited to a schoolhouse or a specific kind of curriculum. This is something that in CE International we've talked about a long time through the lens of education diplomacy, which is a topic that we have pioneered about leveraging partnerships, about building consensus and negotiating for the sake of a shared commitment to improving education opportunities. And so we have all, the 3 of us, or the 4 of us have talked about education diplomacy. And when you've reflected back on your work, how did you leverage some of those skills in order to build partnerships and work with different stakeholders in the community to gain buy-in for what you were looking to accomplish? And I should acknowledge that we are at 11:45. So please, everyone, have patience with us as we share these answers, because I think they are really relevant. So Johnny, how did you use those skills to build partnerships and gain buy-in?
Well, I think probably whenever you're thinking about getting buy-in, I think part of it is just finding what the education challenge is that resonates with everyone that's out there. And as I've said before, I think the real challenge in education in probably nearly every community is usually about the same. How do we grow lifelong learning? We know that that's going to take confidence, that's going to take grit, that's going to take a desire for an experience with some sort of unknown information, unknown skills. That's the kind of challenge that resonates with the community. And so when we want to have lifelong learners, I mean, we want our children to be lifelong learners. We want our employees to be lifelong learners. And that's really where Destination Imagination's pedagogy and mindset comes into play around the creative process, because that becomes a great bridge when you start considering education diplomacy, because it actually gives a nice universal topic. There's universality to individuals and groups, whether they're academia or whether it's the workforce, to really be able to talk about, growing the future of young people. And of course, we emphasize showing learners the skills and knowledge they possess while they're examining any sort of new experience and learning new information. And that's a drawing card for the community as you talk to those in the community about bettering the education of youth. Since our philosophy of learning really doesn't sit with just one age group, I mean, we're pre-K through university, the community members can see how partnering with us reach this wide span because it pushes them from one age group to the next, if you would, in what we're talking about and on out into life. And also because we're a volunteer-based organization, we find that the community members become part of us. They become part of our volunteer base, and we're better able to incorporate our learning style and our philosophy around this creative process and into the, we were able to then to reach in the traditional, into beyond classroom spaces in unique ways that suit their community needs for bringing in new skills to learners. We're not formulaic in that way, and there's flexibility to be able to deliver that out into the community as an experience for meeting a variety of needs. Not all communities are alike, and that's interesting because we work with a lot of different communities, but we do know that all communities recognize the need for growing lifelong learners, particularly around the durable skills, communication, creativity, critical thinking, collaboration. Josh alluded to those earlier. And those are of importance to the workforce stakeholders as well as to parents. So I think that those skills being acquired at an early age speak to the community. And that kind of brings in the entire ability for us to reach a community, to talk to a community in a common way.
Can I just say, I love that you just used the phrase durable skills for those skills. I think a lot of times there's the habit of wanting to call them soft skills. This is something that came up last week. And that by calling them durable, which is a synonym for hard, but it's a long lasting skill. I've never heard that. I love it. I'm going to steal that and take credit myself. I'm teasing you, Johnny.
Well, and I think that's a lot of what Amrita has been talking about with the young people they work with. They are building some durable skills for those young people who will move, who are mobile, who are going to move quickly, but they will take those skills with them no matter where they go.
Absolutely durable. And Mohammed Arif in our audience shared a really good example of just communicating the benefits of education, in his case, through English language learning and opening doors. And I like how you acknowledge, Mohammed Arif, that it's hugely satisfying, the small successes. I'll also acknowledge that when I probably scared people because I did this a little bit ago, it was because I meant to say Josh instead of Johnny, but Johnny kicked this off really excellently. And Josh, I'm going to turn it to you and ask how you leverage those skills to gain community buy-in.
Yeah, I'm actually glad Johnny went first because he kind of got me thinking in terms of, Johnny, you were talking about sort of sometimes there's like a scarcity, like there's not enough resources, we can't do this. And I think one of the big pieces that I found in working with others is to shift that to an abundance mindset and so a lot of the work with partners is mindset. You know, that's actually some of the hardest work. And so how do we, rather than focusing on problems or we don't have enough, but trying to look at all the wealth of resources we do have. And so that's a big part of how I think about education diplomacy. And then the other is thinking about, well, how do you reveal that abundance? And so that people really buy into that, because it's one thing. And as someone that teaches storytelling, I actually think our own stories reveal all the experiences that we have to share. Because often with CommunityShare, I might approach someone and say, hey, you know, you should sign up and create a profile. And they say, oh, I'm an engineer. And I think about, you know, is that really who you are? Or is that just what's on your business card? Because we have we're multifaceted creatures that have all kinds of lived experience, whether we speak multiple languages, or, you know, we are the first to go to college, or we know about our neighborhood history. You know, for me, it's really thinking about the whole human, and that is what they can contribute, not just, you know, that they're a software engineer or a designer. And so I think if we shift our mindset, that will enable us to collectively see the wealth in our communities. And then along with that, I think we tend to focus on the idea of learning ecosystems. So really thinking about how can we each add value to each other and add value to the whole system, rather than thinking about, well, what's best for my nonprofit or my company, but how can we all work together that actually adds value? So it's almost like a regenerative system that's creating value that perhaps didn't even exist before, but collectively we're creating that. And I think we can do that by sharing our stories and then creating a new narrative for the future of what education can look like.
It's excellent. Something that you said, I think tied back to what Johnny mentioned, is getting those volunteers, the community members involved, and kind of opening their eyes again to how joyful of an experience it is to be engaged in learning, not just for the learners themselves. You get to share your knowledge as, in the case that Josh uses, as an engineer, but then you, as a person, are reminded of what it's like to be in that environment, to be learning again. And I think that is a really, really good example of engaging education diplomacy, or engaging people through education diplomacy. You remind people what education can accomplish on a grand scale. Amrita.
So yeah, I completely agree with the two co-panelists. I would just like to add on that we work with communities who are probably most of the time, or many times, first-time learners. For them, any kind of experience is new, and they probably have a lot of barriers in their thinking about education, which starts from reading and writing. So our first job is to break that barrier. They've never been to school, so maybe they have a lot of other skills, but as far as being to a school or being educated in a formal setting has not been done. So for them, a lot of these experiences, and many of them have not even had a very joyful or a very engaging childhood. So to make them think that actually childhood can be joyful, childhood can be learning, childhood can be experiential, so many of them don't even recognize where the childhood ended and where the adulthood started. So that's the kind of community that we are working with. So a lot of times we spend in giving them those childhood experiences. We spend a lot of time bringing about those sensitivities, that what was your childhood and how would you like the childhood for children now that are around you to be. So just that thinking, to bring them to that thinking platform that, okay, ours was probably not that, but what can we do to bring another kind of learning experience or another kind of childhood? I mean, not even learning, I would go back to childhood and what that meant for them and what they would like it to mean to children now. So we do a lot of exercises around that, and we find that to us is the crux of the whole program. So once they are engaged, they are the ones who are going to be the voices, who are going to make these programs sustainable, who are going to take them forward. And their belief is the most important thing for us. And we are, as I said, working with communities that are migrant, many times not staying in one place for more than 4 months in a year. So we really need to take that window of opportunity and work very closely with them so that when they move out, they may not have a mobile creches at the next place they go to. So how do they carry this experience and build on this experience and carry this experience to others who they meet? So that to us is the multiplier. That to us is the way that you build on that people power, that, that whole process of learning it, how it can, how it can become a movement really. So we rely a lot on, building communities around this whole concept, bringing about those bonds between the people who work with them, the childcare workers, and the parents and the community members, not as a teacher and a parent. And most of the time we find that in most schools around, the teacher is up there and the parent is being talked down upon. So how you bond, how do you support each other, how you become a supportive person to that program to help make it a sustainable program. So those are the kind of things that we work around. And for us, that is the most important piece in the education diplomacy. So if we can reach as many people with these messages, and if we can bring them together in this movement, that's where our success is going to be. It is a very long way and it is not easy, but we keep on trying, and we have been able to gather quite a big population around us by now.
Fantastic. Thank you, Amrita. Yes, again, sharing the message, that was a common thread of just making sure that everyone hears how they can be involved and why being involved is important, is crucial. And I also want to point out that Lamberto Pilatan shared a really, really comprehensive answer about how he works with the community to engage them. There's some specific ideas in there. It's really, really detailed. I encourage everyone to read it because I think this is a really good approach. And thank you for sharing, Lamberto. I also want to acknowledge that we are at noon already. And I think Johnny and Amrita and Josh, if it's okay, maybe we turn to some audience questions and so that we can ensure that everything is moving forward okay. Amrita, I do want to also give you the opportunity, though, that if you shared some photos with me, if you wanted to give everyone an idea of what Mobile Creches has been doing recently, I'll happily share that.
Yeah, so if you could share those pictures. So during the COVID lockdowns, which were very severe in India, the population that suffered the most was the migrant population. But we reached out to them with few, activities to be doing at home. We used to be calling the parents up, and they would take really things from the environment like leaves and some, whatever they could find, twigs and even vegetable and fruit. And the parents would interact with the children, because normally the parents are working probably from 9 to almost 8 in the evening on the construction sites or in the urban areas. But here now they also did not have work. So they could spend that time with children, but how to do it, in an engaging manner is what we tried to build for them. And we brought them into many activities which they could do together. You can see there are glasses from the home, and the children are playing with these glasses and a ball, trying to play 9 pins or something like that with these glasses. So these were the little things that we did. That's a child doing a role play with, playing house with the mother. And again, this child is trying to do some activities with the glasses and mugs and utensils at home. So we encourage them to use, they didn't have any teaching learning material or even toys. Most of the time, there are no toys available to them. So how do they learn? What can we do? And these were the things that we improvised on, and the parents did that very happily. And we found the parents were also as engaged, and they enjoyed this whole activity as well. Thank you, Jeremy.
No, thank you for sharing. It's a shame that we don't have a lot more time to dive into this, but I thought it was really important to see that, because a lot of times this is a good reflection of what some people, Johnny and Josh had mentioned previously, is sometimes resources may be limited, but if you look at the social capital, the humans that are involved, learning is a really joyful, rewarding experience. And you see in those photos, mothers and adults equally as engaged in the learning process with the children. So I wanted to make sure that we got to share that. So we are now to the section of questions and answers, and I would like to hear from the audience. We do have one question already in the queue, and I'm going to ask that one first and just turn this over to the panelists. So feel free to just jump in with whatever answer you may have. And I encourage other viewers to use the question and answer function in the bottom of your screen to ask your questions. We'll try to get to a few of those. So the first question comes from Dr. Sudesh Kumar Aryan. That the question is does the online education system help advance quality education? Particularly, we've seen during COVID pandemic a lot of increase in online education, and so what does that change? Does it, and particularly since we're talking about the community, does it how does the community fit into that? Does it interrupt the process of quality education, or can it help supplement it? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
I can take that because we faced a lot of challenges regarding that, because most of the communities didn't have either smartphones or laptops or whatever digital platforms for communication. So it became a very big challenge for most of the people. I mean, majority of the populations in India, to say that online intervention, besides what I personally feel, it's not interactive, it's all that we know of. But beyond that, in whatever circumstances, we found that it created a bigger discriminatory kind of a scene within the country, because there were the difference between the economic disparity grew even wider, because there were people who could have these gadgets which could be used for all these online sharings and online, but in a family which is just making two ends meet, for them to have a smartphone, maybe there's one smartphone in the house and that is always taken by the patriarch or the father. So the child never gets to learn, and children were facing major challenges. And these 2 years, education has taken a real backseat and has really faced many challenges for majority of the children in our country.
Thank you, Amrita. Josh, Johnny, did you want to add anything?
I was just going to add that I think that what we've seen is that the online opportunities have been a really positive, they have positive potential. They have great potential because we can connect through online. We can connect with the who that Josh was talking about without having to actually be in their presence, which is a great thing. We discovered the same thing that Amrita is talking about, is that there are people that are lacking, and so therefore it puts them at a greater chasm, because you have the ones who are able to have that experience and the ones who aren't. With that said, it has caused our organization to start looking out and around for partnerships that say, we would love to bring online experiences to some underdeveloped areas. Could you help us? And mainly what we need is money, funds, so that those people that living in areas that do not have those devices, that we can bring that to them, whether it is internet service, whether it is the phone, whether it's a laptop, whatever it is. And so it's kind of reshaped even how we look at our partnerships with some organizations to say these are needs we have. And it's needs because the chasm is spread wider because of what we've seen through the pandemic and the lack of being able to have the devices.
It does beg the question, though, that sometimes I think a lot of the solution gets so focused on the digital learning experience. And obviously the potential, as you mentioned, Johnny, is massive. It's undeniable. There could be a lot of positive. But when an education system is focusing solely on that, they put all of their efforts and the emphasis and behind that is ultimately what drives that widening divide. And when we do look at focusing on ensuring every education experience continues, such as the images that Amrita shared, even though they may not look as technological, they don't seem as complex, they don't have the ability to open up the massive world through the internet, they're still learning, they're still engaged, they're still enjoying, they're creating a human connection. And so I think putting those kinds of solutions on an equal emphasis with some of the digital solutions is what we all agree ultimately gets to what we want to see, and it's that the learner remains central and important no matter what the context. So yeah, I agree with both of you. Josh, I
was just going to say, Jeremy, forgive me for interrupting, but I think that the important thing there is when we talk about digital, it's about connecting people. It's about connecting for an experience. It's not about individuals isolated interacting with a digital product. It is really about a connective device for a better experience.
That's a very good distinction. Thank you for mentioning that. Josh, was there anything you wanted to add?
Not too much. I would just say, I think thinking about technology in service of learning and community is central. Like, to use technology just to use a flashy, tool, but what is the intention of the technology, and what can technology do, and what do humans need to do, and how do we? I think where we're still challenged as a society is how do we weave technology in a way that creates healthy relationships offline and online? We tend to either go in a camp where there's a lot of techie people, or there's people that want to do community-based work. And I'm actually interested in some ways with CommunityShare is how to use technology to get people off of technology. And so I think there's a lot of questions around the role of technology in society that we really need to examine.
I completely agree. There's obviously, as I mentioned, the potential is undeniable, but we want to be careful of treating it as a silver bullet, the solution to everything. And we want to make sure that we always think about the central purpose of learning, as you mentioned earlier in our discussion, Josh. And there's a lot of ways to fulfill that purpose. I will ask one more question that came in from the audience that I think is really related to our overall goal of having this series of Rethinking Education. And it's from Tawhid Oladipo. And Tawhid asks, well, it frames it about how can one best develop and improve a passion for innovative skills in teaching and learning. So it's talking, and then the question is from Tawhid is, can inspiring others, is that more focused on simply being innovative as a tutor, and how is it essential for an educator or someone to acquire innovative skills? So the value of innovation in being an educator, in being a community member, what is the importance of that, and how can one maybe grow in that way? Anyone want to take a shot? Yeah.
I will step in there and say that I really and truly think that it is changing the mindset of the individual. And I will use myself personally. I was an educator for years, and whenever I encountered and looked at what Destination Imagination had put out, I was an educator at the time in a middle school classroom. And when I looked at the creative process and said, this really has to be about me creating within myself an understanding of what motivates them, how is that shaped, that really and truly changed my way of teaching. It changed my mindset on learning, as opposed, instead of me saying, what am I going to teach today? It was more about, how am I going to get my learners engaged? And so it really did. So I would suggest that we need a better focus within educating, parenting, and all of that, a mindset on what does it look like to keep the experience open for the learner and for the person who's delivering that. And I think knowing some sort of formal process, it doesn't hurt, because it helps you look at delivery and what the behaviors are that come back from the child. The behaviors in the experiences that Amrita and them are putting out there on the streets, it's the experience that comes back, and the behaviors you look at and going, that's making an impact on the child's learning. And we can see that because we recognize what that looks like. So I think it's important that we as individuals have a mindset that is geared toward knowing what innovation looks like, or what creative looks like, or what the process is.
I think you're, go ahead, Amrita.
Sorry. I just like to add on to what Johnny said, that with that, I think there's a certain amount of passion. So if you're passionate about whatever you're doing, innovation somehow comes because you want to create that innovation. I mean, you want to see that passion happening. And when you're passionate, you're thinking of the various ways to connect. And that's what I think I can say that personally, that's what has driven me to innovate and to always rethink about education.
Thank you, Amrita.
Yeah, just to sort of follow up, I mean, the word education comes from educare, which means to draw out, not to dump in, not to download. So I think we need to remember in each of us, what it already exists, what we need. It's sort of how do we draw out and support people to develop their own voice and their passions that already exist. And so I think that what Amrita is saying really resonates around that. And I had one other thought that I lost, but that's okay.
Thank you, Tawhid. I think what we heard consistently is if you want to be innovative, if you want to continue sharing knowledge, if you want to ensure that your students and learners have more opportunities, if you want that, you can make it happen. That asking that question consistently, that I said, what does it take for our learners to continue learning? If you're asking that question, if you're thinking about that, you already are consistently employing an innovative mindset. Josh?
Yeah, just it came back to me, which is if you're asking people to innovate or whatever, first, what does that even mean? What is it? You know, that's a big word. It's like sustainability. What does that exactly mean? And two, are you creating the conditions where people feel safe and can be vulnerable enough to try something new and not, and the point of it is to learn and not to be judged? Because I think a lot of times we want people to try new things, but we create a structure that isn't supportive of a creative and innovative process, which is you start with a question that you don't know the answer, which is not how most education is. You're taking a test and then you know there's an answer. So I think we need to approach it with a mindset of creating the conditions where people feel like they can take those risks, whether it's an educator or a young person.
And failing to succeed, because in some of that, there is going to be some failure, and we have such an inhibition when it comes to the thought of us failing. But the way you succeed is sometimes it's many failures, maybe a big failure, but it's always moving forward to succeed.
You have set this up perfectly. Johnny, you mentioned sharing some sort of system can sometimes help, and there are various systems to look and dive into innovation. We have at CE International an innovation self-assessment for educators and education leaders. So if you were to go into, well, you know what, I'll just share the link directly in the chat so that you have this all available. This is a quick survey that will allow everyone, if you are interested in seeing what, I think sometimes having just a language around innovation helps you think a little bit more about, am I doing this? How well am I doing it? How can I improve? Seeing some of these questions will help you think a little bit more about that, Tawhid, and anyone else. So we are at 12:15 almost. And so before we close, I just want to offer Johnny, Josh, and Amrita the opportunity to maybe share some information about how our viewers can learn more about your organizations, and then we will wrap up. Amrita?
So we have a website, which is there, and of course, Anne has put it up right there. So anyone who wants to really know more about our work can get in there. But it's a 50-year-old organization, and we are a pioneering organization. We didn't have many daycare centers in India, and especially at work sites when we started off so many years back. So it was really one of a heartfelt response by one of our founders and co-founders who found children being, just left on some rubble and some kind of building material while the parents went to work. And she went and she brought the children under a tent. So while our name can sometimes tell you different things, we don't go in vans, we don't move about. We are in one center, but we move from construction to construction. That's how we started off. But now we are in urban settlements, working with the underserved and underprivileged children and communities in the country. We work with governments, we work in partnerships, we work with CSOs, we work with nonprofits, we work with state, federal governments. We partner with them, we build models, we develop, we have training modules, we develop capacity build, we do capacity building of communities, of childcare workers. So it's And we do policy briefs, we do policy papers. So it's grassroots to policy. That's the kind of intervention that Mobile Creches has, and specializing in early childhood development, especially the under threes. So care and development of under threes is what we focus on in our organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Amrita. Josh?
Yeah, I think just our website is a great place, communityshare.us. And then just to emphasize what Amrita shared is I think of this work as co-designing with the community. You know, since we started 7 years ago, we've built it literally with educators and community members. So it's something that I think if you're going to develop a sense of ownership and stewardship of the vision, if you're doing that with community from the beginning rather than you will build it and they will come approach, I think that's a really important thing to consider. And but yeah, our website, and there's a 3-minute video on there that helps just kind of show what we're doing, and then people are welcome to reach out to me directly.
Thank you, Josh. Johnny?
Go to our website, check it out, but just let me throw this out there kind of as a call to action. I want to get to the kids in your community. I want to change lives in your community. Look me up on the website, send me an email. I want to talk to you. It's all about changing kids' lives. So let's get in touch and let's see what we can do about rethinking the education where you are.
Beautiful. And with that, thank you all, Johnny, Josh, and Amrita, for joining us and sharing your knowledge. This is a really, really engaging, important discussion, talking about how community can and should be involved in the education process. I'm very grateful. As a reminder to all the members in the audience, you can find more information about their work and other organizations around the world by subscribing to our magazine, Childhood Education Innovations, which is on our website under the Publications tab. This video was recorded on YouTube, so if you follow our YouTube channel, you will see it there, and it is accessible if you want to come back and visit again or share with any colleagues. And then when you close out this window, there will be a brief survey. If you share your thoughts about the survey and any questions that you may still have, I know we got one more question in the chat afterwards that we just don't have time for. If you share those, any questions that might come to you later, I will make sure that we can connect those with the panelists and address them as quickly as possible. And then finally, next 2 weeks from now on October 27th at 10 a.m. Eastern will be the final session in the Rethinking Education Webinar Series, Rethinking Education in a Country. So that'll be the last one, looking at another layer of the education system and how it can be evolved. So you will receive, anyone who attended will receive a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to that registration. Thanks again, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Josh, Johnny, and Amrita, for sharing your knowledge. It has, again, been a wonderful experience. And yeah, I hope everyone takes care. Have a good day.